Dear friends, hello and welcome. I'm Zeid Hussein, President of the International Peace Institute, and I'm delighted today to welcome Jesselina Rana from Civicus, who is the point person on the 1 for 8 billion campaign, the campaign that was started close to 10 years ago, devoted to the improvement of the selection process when it comes to the UN Secretary General. Jesselina, I'm delighted to welcome you here at IPI.
Thank you so much for having me today, Zeid.
So, could you begin just by giving us a background for the viewers to the campaign and the reasoning behind it? There is a direct link to the deep desire on the part of many, many people across the world to see the first woman elected as Secretary General. But could you share with the viewers the background? I'd be very grateful to you.
Thank you so much, Zeid. So as you mentioned, the 1 for 8 billion campaign now, which was 10 years ago, the 1 for 7 billion campaign, really started out with civil society coming together to voice our concerns around the lack of transparency on the selection process of the Secretary General. As we all may know, Article 97 of the UN Charter does have some lines on the selection, but it is limited but not exhaustive. So civil society really did see an opportunity to voice our concerns about the transparency around the process. So a lot of it was around transparency, accountability 10 years back. But now that we are where we are, one of the things we learned from the campaign was that there should have been more advocacy around having a woman at the top position, and that is something that we were not very vocal about. We did have it as part of our principles earlier, but this year we plan to take it forward in a much more strategic way.
So that was missing in 2016,
yes,
you think? Yeah.
Yes, we were more focused on transparency and accountability, and even this year we are equally focused on transparency and accountability of the process, but while also championing a feminist woman Secretary General.
So there is a proposal now before the General Assembly, a so-called zero draft resolution. I'm assuming you have been very much engaged with the member states who have been working on this, and a number of, four in particular, are very vocal about the need to ensure that the very best, the very highest caliber of individual is elected to the position of Secretary General. What are your feelings about the draft as it exists now? Where is the campaign's position on the draft? What's missing? What's good about it? What are your feelings about it?
Thank you so much. So we started having these conversations last year when the UN General Assembly started. We released our policy platform, and since then we've had conversations with multiple civil society organizations to really prepare ourselves for this moment when the zero draft, or even before the zero draft, when the elements paper was shared with us. And we have a secretariat within the 1 for 8 billion campaign, a group of civil society organizations, both Global North and Global South-led civil society organizations. And our true principles and our core values resonate with international law and what is already existing in some of the consensus language that has been adopted in the General Assembly. So when we're looking at the elements paper, or the zero draft, it has now been taken forward up to Rev 2. And we did see some promising language in the zero draft and in the elements paper, and that really gave us a beacon of hope, I would say.
Could you share what those elements are? That
Sure. In the zero draft we had there were 13 recommendations that the 1 for 8 billion campaign made, and we saw a lot of it as part of the elements paper and the zero draft, including language on calling for a woman's consideration for a gender balance Secretary General selection process, a clear timeline for when the process would start. They had this language on November being the deadline when it would start. Introducing General Assembly straw polls so that the General Assembly can also indicate their preference even before the Security Council considers the candidates. There was also language on multiple candidates, which was interesting. That was something that we had proposed as well, for the Security Council to be able to send multiple names of candidates to the General Assembly.
Yeah.
And there was also language on financial disclosure. There was language on engaging with civil society through town halls. So these are promising languages that all were part of our recommendations that we saw in the zero draft.
Yeah. The financial disclosure part I thought was excellent. One of the things that I find strange, which I would hope that the member states and those co-facilitators and those champions of the draft would consider, is democratizing all of it. Prior to 2006, anyone could be looked at, any name could be looked at. And then there was a decision by the Security Council, not so much the General Assembly, the Security Council, that it would only consider formal nominations of states. So if you were a member of an opposition where you didn't have the support of the government, it would be possible that another member state would nominate you. This happened in the case of Kristalina Georgieva, nominated by the UK in 2015. But it's not as democratic as opening it up without having the nominations. Does the campaign have any position on that?
So the campaign has been very clear about, firstly, in terms of particular candidates, we are neutral. Our position is to focus on the process itself and to hopefully elect a feminist woman Secretary General.
Yeah.
But having said that, we are supportive of guidelines which the PGA could come up with to make sure that there are people who are committed to multilateralism, committed to an international rules-based order. And we're also appreciative of certain language that was there in the zero draft, where we saw that, you know, multiple states can come together to nominate one person. And we thought that was very interesting.
That's a good, yes.
Yeah.
I think I entirely agree. I think that's a clever sort of fix. If you're not going to get rid of the nominations, then at least that is not a bad way to do it at all. And it would show a sort of that there is a broader preference, that it's not limited to one government. So I think you're absolutely right. Jesselina, there is an argument, and here, sort of forgive me for being for posing what could be a criticism. That people may well say, look, the Security Council has really had a choppy record when it comes to Secretary Generals. We've had some outstanding ones, we've had some good ones, we've had some not so good ones. The General Assembly has a similar, perhaps even worse record when it comes to the presidents of the General Assembly. We've had some outstanding presidents of the General Assembly. Some were okay and some were really, frankly, not very okay. And there haven't been too many women presidents of the General Assembly. So the campaign is putting its faith in the General Assembly, as are the member states that are trying to revitalize the General Assembly. But is there an argument to say maybe this is misplaced because the General Assembly's performance hasn't been that much better? Your reactions to that?
I would take that as a valid criticism, especially in the times we are right now. I think a lot of people, general public, are losing faith in the multilateral system. But that is where civil society, especially those of us who take forward a rights-based approach, who agree on certain principles of international law and how multilateralism should be conducted. I think the alternative way of thinking is, well, if not the General Assembly, then where do we go with this?
Or you could say, I think, listening to what you're saying, and I agree with you completely, is that you have to look at the empowering of the General Assembly across many issues, of which one central one would be the selection of the Secretary General. And if you can empower it to take action where the Security Council clearly has not been able to take action, then in time you can see it improving its performance in all areas. I think given what you just said, I think I could see that. I could see the sort of the transparency, the openness, and so forth. One of the concerns I have, though, is that let's assume that the General Assembly is exercising its veto. Right? It can reject all the names suggested by the Security Council, and decide it doesn't like any of them. And then similarly, a permanent member can reject any name that comes that would be sort of favorable to the majority in the General Assembly. Is there not a possibility we just get stuck and have no one elected?
I think that's where the process for the President of the General Assembly comes, even before the process begins in November, or now, as we would like to think, the last quarter, as we've seen the term being watered down in the second draft. we need to make sure that the process is not just shrunk down, but it is supported by guardrails, and this is possible.
Yeah.
We can have the President of the General Assembly in the joint letter that she would be sending out with the Security Council have certain commitments, certain guidelines for the type of person that they would want as the Secretary General. This includes someone who's committed to multilateralism, committed to the principles of the UN Charter, committed to a rules-based international order. And similarly, that's where we've also prioritized the straw polls. Unfortunately, language around the General Assembly straw polls has been removed from the second draft. But that's where we believe, to avoid such a deadlock, like you mentioned, if we're able to give the General Assembly, if we're able to empower the General Assembly to make sure that their concerns are heard, their support is heard, even before the Security Council considers certain recommendations, it makes sure that we reposition the General Assembly from not just being a rubber stamp on the Security Council's selection process. So we believe that there are processes that you can take forward even before the process begins. The selection process begins, to make sure we're not in a deadlock, to make sure we're not with a candidate who might not be able to serve the tenure as well as the rest of the UN membership would expect them to. But having said that, the Secretary General's position is also a very difficult position, and it is a position that requires a strong team to lead with her or them. And it is something that we are also prioritizing, making sure that members, civil society and member states recognize and acknowledge that this is not a one-person job at the end of the day.
And the final point, I think that needs a little bit of reflection as well. It would seem to be the case, and I've worked with a number of Secretaries General, and I did my academic training focusing on one many years ago. But the better Secretaries Generals are often, not exclusively so, and clearly there was one that wasn't, the better Secretaries Generals are often the diplomats that have a feel for how to work with delegations, understand the issues in a more subtle way. And they may not be sort of politicians that are very good at sort of populist types of tactics, speaking extremely well in a public setting, but having no courage, not courageous, not taking, because they're genuflecting, because they're very they're driven by another way of thinking. Do you think what it is that you're proposing can capture that? Can capture that essence of what is needed to be a good Secretary General, and not end up having someone who's immensely skillful, immensely bright, but is lacking the subtle understanding of the craft of diplomacy, understanding multilateral diplomacy, understanding the power of the Secretariat, understanding how creative they need to be. Do you think that can also be brought out?
I believe it can, especially if the resolution and the process that it initiates takes into consideration that there needs to be a vision statement, there needs to be dialogue, and there needs to be public scrutiny of the person. Like you said, we can only know, or we can only hope for a Secretary General who is courageous and skillful in their diplomacy if we're able to engage with them. And increased public scrutiny should be, the guardrail should be the solution and not part of the problem.
Yes. Beautiful response. Bravo. I can fully say that IPI, or the International Peace Institute, supports you fully.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for taking the time to come and see us, Jesselina. And we wish you all the best, you and the countries that are leading this, South Africa, Romania, Costa Rica, Estonia, and many others from the ACT group as well. So good luck, and we will look forward, perhaps at a later stage, doing another interview with you when we have a successful outcome in the General Assembly.
Thank you so much, Zeid. We appreciate your time and for having us here, both 1 for 8 billion and Civicus. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.